Hello and welcome back to another episode of the For the Property Investor podcast. And we're here back on each week with the weekly news. And of course, the only man to bring the news is Nick Bendel. Hello, Nick.
Hello, Owen. Always lovely to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. And what's been happening in your week, Nick?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad you asked. Very polite of you. I am the owner of a business called Hunter and Scribe, which is a content writing agency, and we specialize in finance and property. We work with dozens of mortgage brokers around Australia, and one of the things we help our broker clients with is social media content. And since we last spoke, Owen, Hunter and Scribe, we signed up a mortgage broker who wants us to provide them with 4 social media posts per week, which we're looking forward to doing.
Excellent. And you do a wonderful job. I know because I subscribe.
Well, that's very kind of you.
And yes, this week in property management, we have been still busy leasing properties, although the huge rush we had over Christmas for some reason has started to die down. So that's good. We can now start looking after these owners with their new tenants and get everything worked out there. But Nick, let's get into the news. Well, what have you brought us this week?
Well, our first story this week, Owen, is Home Guarantee Scheme hits major milestone. Over 200,000 Australians have achieved home ownership through the federal government's Home Guarantee Scheme since its launch in January 2020, according to Housing Australia. The Home Guarantee Scheme includes the First Home Guarantee and Regional First Home Buyer Guarantee, which let eligible first home buyers purchase a property with just a 5% deposit without paying LMI. And the Home Guarantee Scheme also includes the Family Home Guarantee, which lets eligible single parents purchase a property with just a 2% deposit without paying LMI. Now, sharing this information with you, Owen, begs the question, should the federal government be in the business of helping first home buyers and single parents to enter the property market?
Good question. And the answer is yes and no. It's it's yes from the point of view of we want to help people who truly deserve to have ownership, and it's a good thing. It provides stability in their lives. It provides so much positiveness in people's lives to own the home they live in, and for their future as well. Now, on the reverse side of the coin is the issue that it creates more demand, and it also allows people who maybe are not in the real financial position or ability to own a home, get into home ownership. And so it can get them into a lot of trouble. So I hope this scheme, in the way that they evaluate the eligibility, is done in a way that helps the borrower and the purchaser really make sure that they can afford long term what they're getting into, because a lot of these government schemes in the past, in decades past, have really put people into home ownership and into a lot of debt that they just do not know how to manage and are incapable of managing.
Okay, now you'll be pleased to know I did a bit of research before our podcast.
Yeah.
And so it's commonly known that Australia's home ownership rate is about 2/3. The actual figure, the exact figure is 66.3%. The research I did is that home ownership rate of 66.3% ranks us 50th in the world, according to World Population Review. The number one ranking is held by Laos, which has a home ownership rate of 95.9%. And some of the
Wow.
other countries ahead of Australia, by the way, many of the countries ahead of Australia are poorer countries, but some of the wealthier countries ahead of Australia include Singapore at 87.9% and the EU as a whole at 69.9%. Some of the countries behind Australia include America at 65.9%, New Zealand at 64.5%, the UK at 63%, Japan at 55%, and Switzerland at 42.2%. And the reason I mention all this data to you is to ask the question, should we as a country care about our home ownership rate?
Um, I think it's important in some respects, but I don't think there should be as much importance on it as we do put on it. And it's not as important as it used to be in generations past. If you look at many of those countries that are fairly similar, but maybe just slightly lower than us, they're all probably more comparable economies, comparable demographics in terms of populations as well, with New Zealand, the UK, and the US. So it's and some of those other countries are probably different in terms of um, the culture around buying a home. And that's maybe where we were a generation or two ago. And so things are just a little bit different now. Is it important? No. To own your own home as time's gone past? No. Is it important to have ownership in real estate? Absolutely, yes. And that's where uh, the market has changed. Our culture has changed to where there's a focus more on yes, owning property, but it can be an investment.
Mm.
And you need to look at, and it's more important to have lifestyle opportunities for people to be able to live where they need to for work right now, and a lot of the time, that would be a hell of a lot cheaper to rent where they need to live. But it's important for those people to still have ownership in real estate. So that's where the whole term of rent vesting has come about in the last 10 years or so.
It's interesting you mentioned that it's generally cheaper to rent than to buy and have a mortgage. And mathematical modeling suggests that over the long term, you could finish ahead financially by renting rather than owning. However, that assumes that you're going to take the difference between the rent and your mortgage and you're going to invest that money. What the vast majority of people do is either they don't invest the money or they only invest a small portion of it. If you are going to
Yes.
invest the difference, that wealth can compound over the long term, the same as if that wealth was invested in a property.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, most people they don't take that extra step of actually investing in property. So you can only be a rent investor if you actually invest.
Mm.
Otherwise, you're just a renter.
And this is actually one of the great things. I remember reading Noel Whittaker's book years ago, and there was a line in it that always resonated with me. He was talking about probably the best thing about home ownership is that it's a forced saving scheme. When you buy a home, you're forced to keep making these mortgage repayments. And so therefore, you're forced to keep building equity. You're forced to keep building wealth. Whereas if someone is renting and then they've got this surplus income, they're not forced to invest it. And that's probably why people who do buy property, whether as an owner occupier or an investor, they end up accumulating more wealth than someone who rents because of this forced saving scheme.
Mm. And that's true for when Noel wrote that book. In terms of, well, I mean, it's still true today, but it was a lot easier to implement
Mm,
when Noel wrote that book. And whereas today it's due to it being more difficult to save up deposit amounts, etc. Takes a lot longer for people to be able to get in markets, especially in the major cities in Australia. So um, that's why, yeah, people should be more diligent or take more action about investing in property if they need to live, if they still need to rent where they need to live because they just cannot afford to buy where they need to live.
So we've been talking about housing and how important an issue it is for the country. The federal government, Owen, has lots of issues to deal with: the economy, national security, energy, trade, education, health. How high up the lists of priorities do you think housing should be?
Um, it is a very important one because it affects everyday Australians, and it affects their ability to live comfortably um, on a day-to-day basis. And at the end of the day, if governments want to be voted in, then yeah, they need to help the people be comfortable with their everyday lives and feel like they're able to um, either buy a house or to be able to invest for their future and at least have that opportunity to. Um, whereas at the moment, a lot of people don't even feel like they're ever going to have that opportunity. So because of the cost of housing. So it's yes, it is an important one.
Okay, well, our final two stories are actually going to explore those themes a little bit further. So, our next story is home building costs keep rising. Residential construction costs rose 3.4% in the year to December, according to CoreLogic. While that was below the pre COVID decade average of 4%, it means that home building costs have now risen 30.8% since the pandemic. And of course, that makes life hard for builders who are grappling with tight profit margins and labour shortages. Owen, what impact do rising building costs have on our future housing supply?
It's one of the biggest issues. It's that it's not the rising cost of property in the general market that's the problem. It's the rising cost of building materials as well as labor costs and just labor availability, which is what's pushing up the cost of labor of trades. And so that is probably the number one thing that we need to fix, because quite frankly, if we don't fix these issues and if house prices don't keep up, so if the general values don't keep on rising to match the cost of construction, then we won't have any new housing because it will be unaffordable to actually build it.
Now, you'll be pleased to know I did a bit more research before the podcast. As we know, when the ABS calculates the inflation rate, it analyzes costs from a basket of goods and services.
Mm.
Now, one of these is new dwelling purchases. And according to my research, new dwelling purchases represent 8.1% of that basket. So, based on that, Owen, would it be fair to say that rising home building costs have a significant impact on our inflation rate and therefore the Reserve Bank's interest rate settings?
Absolutely.
So, I guess this is another reason why maybe the government is showing the interest it is in the construction industry and building costs and supply.
Oh, yes. And the Australian economy is always ridden off the back of the construction industry and especially the residential construction industry. So yes, it's an important factor in our economy in so many ways. And so the government needs to stay on top of this. They need to make sure that we've got those supply chains availability of materials, and we need to work out how we can bring those costs down, or at least stop them from rising too much more. But one of the biggest issues that's probably easier to control is the labour shortage, and we need more trades. And yes, it's we could have been a bit more targeted in that huge immigration rush we had. We could have been a bit more targeted to be able to bring in the people that we needed for building more houses.
So I know these are issues we've discussed numerous times during the history of this podcast, and we've also discussed the fact that Anthony Albanese is a very keen listener to this podcast, and I think he's really paid close attention when you hear our third and final story today, which is government aims to grow construction workforce. The federal government has announced a new program which is designed to encourage young Australians to complete an apprenticeship in the housing sector. Under the Housing Construction Apprenticeship, eligible apprentices will receive a $10,000 incentive to work in housing construction. This money will be allocated to apprentices in 5 $2,000 payments at 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, and the end of their apprenticeship. This will support apprentices with cost of living while ensuring we have the skilled workforce we need to deliver our Homes for Australia plan, the Prime Minister said. Owen, what do you think of this policy?
I think it's good. I think it's well needed because yes, who wants to be a an apprentice plumber on the wages they get? With the ditches they have to start digging and so on. But it's also a few decades too late. Um, it's I mean, we're in this mess because of what the federal government, Hawke Keating government in the 80s did by bringing in HECS, telling everyone to finish the HSC and strive to go to university, and everyone else will pay for it and until you get a job. And then that marketing degree or that Bachelor of Arts degree that you did, specializing in yeah, artifacts from some 2,000-year-old civilization that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, you know, it's and then you go and get a job working in retail. I mean, why did we do that? As a result, we now have trades who are earning more than university graduates, um, and because of a lack of supply of them. So it became trendy to go to university. It became the which is great. We want an educated population, of course, but we also need builders, carpenters, electricians, plumbers to be able to do what we need to in this country, to build this country. But instead, no, everyone wanted to go get a cushy office job, and because they went to university, so they must deserve one. So, yeah, it's really wasn't thought out.
Okay, remind me never to tell you about the university degree I got many years ago. I'm just going to keep that to myself.
Well, are you using it today, Nick?
I am. I studied journalism and I'm practicing it all these years later.
Then it was the best thing you ever did.
I suppose so, but had I studied archaeology, I would have earned nothing but your contempt.
Well, unless you became an archaeologist. But if you became a journalist off the back of an archaeology degree, then it's yeah, it's I mean, what's the point?
Well, true. I can't argue with that. Well, one of the things you've touched on is the idea that the labor force that we have today, it's not based on what happened last year. It's based on many years, even decades of policy and how that flows through the system. Now, Albanese is trying to increase the number of building apprentices, which we both think is a good idea. But given that it's going to take a long term, maybe decades, the government, of course, could achieve the same goal much faster through immigration. So should we just import builders and tradies instead of trying to nurture them locally?
Well, I think we are, and I think the answer is both, because we need both. It's yeah, we need a hell of a lot more. So we're doing both. We need both. So it's more of the above.
Should we be trying to import more archaeologists as well?
Don't know. It's that's probably above my pay grade, Nick.
Okay, well, very few things are, but maybe that one is. Now, you know what's interesting? I know we've made the point numerous times that Anthony Albanese is a very keen listener of this podcast, and Michelle Bullock and other leading figures. And I think some people have maybe mocked us, not to our face, but behind our back. And yet we've been talking for a long time about the need to increase the supply of workers in the industry. Anthony Albanese then goes and introduces this policy. So can now anyone doubt that he is indeed a keen listener? This proves it, surely.
Yes, exactly. Maybe all those nasty TikTok comments that we get will start to cease now, because they can see that we're being listened to, and we must be right.
Well, we do have a lot of clout. There is no doubt about that. And you in particular, Owen, always love your keen insights and the fact that you're never afraid to share your opinion. Thank you so much for another interesting discussion.
Thank you, and I think you're the first one to thank me for sharing my opinion.
See you next week.
See you, Nick. Bye.